The film To Kill a Mockingbird was originally a novel written by Harper Lee. Actually, she received the Pulitzer Prize for her achievement. And 2 years after she wrote the novel, Alan Pakula produced the film with Bob Mulligan directing it. It starred Atticus Finch and a group of actors who were part professional and part non-professional. Most of the characters were played by theater actors from the stage in New York, off-Broadway and on Broadway. The play deals with three basic themes. One is the issue of racial injustice, problem of discrimination, primarily in the South, and how that is dealt with. The second theme actually is probably considered very relevant to the title of the film, is the question of social ostracism. What do people do when an individual is very different from the rest of the community? How do they treat him? And then finally, and perhaps most importantly, the film deals with the relationships that are established between Atticus Finch, who is the central character, and his children, Scout and Jem. Now, I mentioned that some of the actors were actually non-professional, and in the case of the two children, Scout and Jem, they were non-professionals. This is the first time they had been in film, and remarkably performed with unusual skill. I'd like to point up a couple of cinematic or filmic elements that you might want to take into consideration when you're watching the film. From the very first frame, even before the story begins, the individual who is responsible for the film credits gets us into the heart of the story. I'm thinking of a man by the name of Stephen Frankfurt. He's responsible for what we see before the film begins. What we see is a cigar box, and we see a young person's hands, presumably Scout's or Jem's, opening up that cigar box, and we see the contents of it. They include crayons, and a stopwatch, a penknife, pencils, and so forth. Then, as that film credits it continues, we see marbles, and how the marbles are brought to a large close-up so that we see them as boulders, one bumping into another. And in the meantime, we're also watching a hand, presumably Scout's or Jem's, draw a picture of a bird. Remember, the name of the film is To Kill a Mockingbird. And before the film credits close, she tears up that sheet. Well, that work done by Stephen Frankfurt doesn't appear at all in the novel, but he was clever enough to go into the story to determine what would be a good way to orient the audience in viewing this picture, because as the story unfolds, we will see how each of these little items becomes kind of significant in the lives of Scout and Jem. During the film credits, we will also be introduced to another cinematic element, and that is the music. The music in this case is composed and conducted by Elmer Bernstein, and it has a child quality about it. It therefore contributes to the orientation of what it is that we're about to see. We're going to be seeing a film that deals with the children of Atticus Finch, and we will see it primarily from their perspective. As a matter of fact, the film is narrated by Scout years later when she's probably in her probably late 20s or early 30s. So the film is in a sense a flashback. Now I'd like to suggest how we can get information from the very first shot of the film story. We've gotten through the film credits, and they've set a pace, and that pace is going to be carried over into the narrative, into the story. And it will also be enhanced by the very first shot, which will be what's called a pan. A pan is like the movement of the head, moving left, moving right, moving up, moving down. So the basic camera swivels, and what we're seeing is the panning down of the camera so that we get a view of the town in which these children live. Macomb, Alabama. Fictitious town, basically representing Harper Lee's hometown, which was Monroeville, Alabama.